There are stories that time itself longs to forget, but they remain, buried beneath the ashes of history, waiting for someone to listen. In the year 1347, Europe stepped into its darkest nightmare. Not war, not famine, but an invisible phantom, the Black Death, swept across the continent, claiming millions of lives and leaving behind scars that would never heal. If you wish to uncover forgotten truths and the hidden stories that history tried to erase, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to subscribe for more dark mysteries waiting to be told. There are moments in history when the world fractures, not with the roar of cannons nor the march of armies, but with the whisper of something unseen, something so small it cannot be held, yet so vast it swallows continents. The year was 1347, and across the gleaming waters of the Mediterranean came ships that should have carried wealth, silk, and spice. But beneath their sails hid the seeds of catastrophe. Rats, their beady black eyes reflecting no light, scurried along wooden decks, and within their fleas festered a darkness far older than the cities it would soon devour. It began, as all endings do, quietly. In the Sicilian port of Messina, the first to fall were sailors, their bodies racked with fever, their flesh erupting in swellings like blackened fruit. Doctors, priests, mothers, none could explain it, and none could escape it. The townspeople whispered of divine punishment, of wrath poured down for sins unspoken. They prayed, but the prayers turned sour on their lips, for by the time the first mass graves were dug, the plague had already moved faster than fear itself. Across the sea, in the shadowed streets of Venice, Florence, and Genoa, it spread like wildfire, an invisible serpent coiling itself around every breath, every heartbeat. In the hushed glow of candlelight, a merchant's wife wept over her dying child, her tears falling onto skin already marbled with death's pale bloom. Outside, the streets echoed with the iron clang of death carts and the low moan of the church bells, bells that rang not for weddings nor for feasts, but for the endless tide of the departed. And yet, even as bodies piled higher, as cities burned their dead in heaps, there were still those who whispered, "This cannot be the end. This must pass," but it would not pass, for something ancient had been unleashed, and Europe, once so proud, so certain, had begun to rot from the inside out. By the winter of 1348, the plague had become a living shadow, a force that devoured not only flesh but the very idea of life itself. In Florence, once a city of splendor and song, the streets stood abandoned, save for the groaning of wheels pulling carts laden with the dead. The bells no longer rang for joy, they tolled for the nameless, the countless, the forgotten. In the heart of this desolation, a merchant named Matteo de Rossi wandered like a ghost through his own city. His hands, once calloused from counting coins, now trembled as he buried his only son beneath the cold, unyielding earth. Grief became a silent companion. His once proud eyes, windows to ambition and wealth, now stared into nothing. He spoke to no one, for there was no one left to speak to. The city's fountains, once flowing with crystal water, now lay choked with weeds and filth. The air reeked not just of death but of something deeper, a decay of the spirit, an erosion of meaning. Some whispered that it was the end of days. Others claimed the stars themselves had aligned against mankind. Matteo, stripped of all he once knew, lit a single candle each night, not to ward off the dark, but to remember the faces he had loved, faces that flickered now only in memory. And in the empty chapels where priests once sang, only the wind remained, cold and indifferent, carrying the distant echoes of a world slowly unmaking itself. As the plague pushed northward into France, England, and the Germanic lands, it left behind not cities but open graves. In the village of Evesham, England, a young woman named Eleanor lived through what no heart was made to endure. Her family, father, mother, 2 sisters, perished within days, their bodies shrouded hastily and buried without prayer. The church had closed its doors. The priest had long since fled. Eleanor was alone, but solitude did not spare her. She saw visions, phantoms of those she loved, their faces twisted in agony, their voices calling her name in the cold mist of dawn. The villagers, desperate, began to turn on each other. Some claimed witches had summoned the pestilence. Others accused the Jews of poisoning the wells. Fear ate through the thin fabric of society, leaving madness in its place. One morning, Eleanor found herself standing before a pyre where innocent souls burned, not for their sins but to cleanse the land of imagined evil. The screams carved into her memory not with sound, but with the silence that followed. She knew then. The plague was no longer just a disease. It had become something else, a darkness of the human soul, a mirror reflecting back mankind's own brutality. And so, she walked alone through a world where compassion had withered, where the dead outnumbered the living, and where even God seemed to have turned his face away. By 1350, the face of Europe was unrecognizable. From the gilded cathedrals of Avignon to the shadowed forests of Bohemia, there stretched a single endless grave. Entire towns vanished. Fields lay fallow. The rivers themselves seemed to carry the sorrow of the land. In Paris, where kings once held court, the nobility cowered behind stone walls, their wealth no shield against the invisible foe. It was there, in the quarter of the dying, that a physician named Guillaume Marchand continued his hopeless work. His eyes, once sharp with the certainty of science, now bore the glassy sheen of a man who had seen too much. He kept a journal, each page darker than the last. At first he wrote of symptoms, fevers, swellings, blackened flesh. But as the months dragged on, his words became poetry of despair. The soul decays as the body decays, the world is undone. He had stopped trying to save lives, instead he bore witness. He watched as mothers smothered their infected children to spare them suffering. He saw entire convents where nuns lay dead in rows, hands still clutching rosaries that no longer held meaning. And in his heart a single truth took root, a terrible understanding that mankind in its arrogance had believed itself master of nature, only to be reminded brutally of its own fragility. On the final page of his journal he wrote, "If there is a God, he weeps, and if there is not, we were fools all along." By the closing months of 1351, the Black Death began to loosen its grip. But the world it left behind was not the world it had found. The air no longer choked with smoke from funeral pyres, yet an invisible ash still clung to every breath. Across the broken landscape of Europe, those who remained, the ragged, the haunted, the barely living, stumbled through silence. The once vibrant cities were reduced to husks, fields ran wild with weeds. The old songs were forgotten, and in their place there remained only memory and fear. In a small village near Nuremberg, a boy named Lucas, barely 12, sat among the ruins of his home. His parents were gone, his sisters gone, his voice lost in the weight of what he had seen. He carved strange shapes into the dirt with a stick, not from madness but because he could no longer remember what else to do. Each night he lit a single candle beside the cracked threshold, though there was no one left to see it. His mind, so young, carried burdens that no heart, no matter how innocent, could bear. Far beyond him, kings who had survived ruled over kingdoms emptied of subjects. The church, once unshakable, trembled beneath the realization that prayers had failed, old truths shattered. In some places, people turned to hedonism, believing the world to be without order. In others, they hardened into cruelty, hunting those they blamed for the catastrophe. The human heart, exposed and raw, showed both its most wretched depths and rare flashes of unspeakable grace. Lucas the boy became a symbol not of hope but of survival, an ember in the ash of an extinguished world. He would grow, he would live, but the mark of the Black Death would never leave him. In his dreams he would always walk empty streets. He would always hear the silence of the bells that no longer rang. And even in distant decades, when laughter returned and life again unfolded, the shadow of those dark years would stretch, unseen but unforgotten, across the soul of Europe. For what the Black Death took was more than life. It took certainty. It taught mankind that beneath stone cathedrals and royal banners we are all, every one of us, fragile as breath, and that sometimes even the light itself must bow before the darkness. And so the world was broken, but from the ash of despair stories remain. If this tale haunts you as it has haunted the bones of Europe for centuries, I invite you to stay with me. Subscribe for more forgotten histories, for more truths wrapped in shadow. Share this story so that those voices, silenced by time, are not lost again. Because some stories must never be buried.